Hello, I'm Douglas Saltis, and I haven't had a professional haircut in 10 months. If that isn't a metaphor for the difficulties we've all been facing in 2020, I have some additional context for you that might set the stage for this conversation today. Since the COVID-19 pandemic struck, only 28% of Canadian small businesses have been able to maintain or exceed their normal revenues. Given that small businesses employ about 8.4 million individuals in Canada, or 70% of the country's total private labor force, that's not a great look. Most small business owners and startup founders have focused on one thing in 2020: survival. But there are goals beyond survival. So, how can business leaders strive for success to close out this year and in 2021? And what can we learn from businesses that have found success in 2020? That's what we're going to talk about today. This is positivity. This is not survival. This is a conversation about success. And I'm super excited to introduce you to the people who are going to be having that conversation with me. Those people are Erin Burry, CEO and co-founder of Willful; Jeremy Hedges, president of the Canadian Shield; and Wayne Cuervo, director of innovation at Cisco Canada. Say hi, everybody.
Hi,
Hey there.
everyone.
Also, not seen, but present felt, we have Stefan from the BetaKit team manning these streams, who's going to be sending questions to me that you submit either on Facebook or Twitter, and we'll look to get those answered during the Q&A. But for now, we're going to dig into the stories that we have here to tell, and maybe give you some insights that you can take forward, some lessons learned going into 2021. So, Erin, maybe I think I want to start with you because you run a very interesting company. When people think of small businesses, tech businesses, they're not thinking about death potentially. Maybe in 2020 that's different. But I want you to talk to us a little bit about what Willful does and how interest in the important kind of estate planning you're providing changed pre and post pandemic. Because I think that's a perfect example again of my haircut aside, how much 2020 has changed our lives.
For sure. Well, first, thanks for having me. Excited to be here. And yeah, I run Willful, which is an online will platform that helps you get your will and power of attorney documents easily and affordably. And as you can imagine, as I'm sure you're thinking if you're watching this, it's not a fun topic to think about, contemplating your own mortality and what happens to you when you pass away. And it tends to not have a sense of urgency to complete because no one knows the deadline. You don't know if you're going to pass away tomorrow or in 60 years. So it just tends to be a task that goes to the bottom of the to-do list. And COVID really changed that. It highlighted that the unexpected can happen and did happen. And it really moved that task to the top of so many people's to-do list who had been procrastinating on it. So as soon as COVID hit, number one, we paused our marketing because it seemed a little bit insensitive and tone deaf to be marketing about, hey, plan for what happens if you pass away at a time when people were actually dying. So we really kind of pulled back on our marketing, and we didn't know whether we would see an influx in traffic or not. But almost immediately, pretty much from the day that the NBA was canceled and Tom Hanks, was diagnosed, we just saw our traffic and sales shoot up, which was a weird feeling, especially at a time when a lot of small businesses saw the opposite. They saw everything going down. So for us, it has had a positive impact on the business, but also a positive impact on just the psyche around end of life and estate planning. It's opened up this conversation about, thinking about this stuff and being prepared for the next time something like COVID happens and prioritizing those non-urgent things that always tend to fall down the to-do list.
Yeah, 2020 is certainly a year where the serious conversations can't be ignored. And I don't know if you're following international news today as we record, that's also a consideration. Erin, I want to maybe have you tell us also about some of the logistical hurdles caused by the remote work component and the social distancing of COVID, but then of just satisfying estate planning and just the institutional hurdles that are faced right now that tech is trying to disrupt. And then I'm going to immediately transition after that to get Jeremy involved, because if we're talking about logistical hurdles, he's solved a few this year. But talk to us about how that's playing out in the health tech, fintech, legal tech world that you play in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also interested to hear Jeremy's take on it because we're a software business. So we were lucky in that it was easy for us to transition to remote work. What wasn't easy is the process of estate planning in a time when people have lost access to printers and people didn't want to see other humans. Estate planning still involves, the laws across Canada require that a will is signed on paper, that it's stored physically offline, and that you have to get together with witnesses to sign that document in person. So what we saw was just a real shift in how lawmakers were looking at that process and expediting change. So they've now allowed for virtual witnessing of wills in certain provinces like Ontario and BC. And they're looking at tabling legislation in BC and Ontario that would actually allow for you to sign your will and store your will online, which seems kind of like a no-brainer in 2020. I think COVID kind of put a spotlight on all of those antiquated processes, from certain tax forms to wills to whatever else, where everyone kind of sat up and said, wait, why do we have to sign this on paper? Why have we not moved this online? And I think it's been a good thing. Obviously, there are some positives that have come out of COVID. And one of those is it's just expedited not just legal change, but also just consumer adoption of technology by a decade or two. So that's been exciting for us to see. But on the logistical side, the most we had to deal with was we offered free printing and shipping of wills for about a month. So my husband, who's also my co-founder, and I printed and shipped 400 wills in April. That was our biggest logistical hurdle, but I think Jeremy can probably top that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good transition. And hey, this isn't a competition. This is us sharing stories to inspire people listening, and help close out this year with some positivity. Jeremy, you are someone that we've spoken with on BetaKit before, because not only do you play in the Canadian tech space, BetaKit also has a focus on impact stories. And when it comes to 2020, there's nothing more impactful than people kind of punching back against COVID-19. You had some interesting decisions to make this year. Maybe not in a sudden interest in your core business, where I didn't mention you're also the CEO of a company called Inksmith, but you just decided to create another entire business building PPE, personal protective equipment, for let's say at this point anyone who needs it across Canada. Can you talk a little bit about your decision to spike your involvement in this, and then maybe some of the logistical hurdles that you've encountered along the way?
Yeah. I mean, I think really our story started with community need. We had a local doctor. They came to us and they said Waterloo Region is short 10,000 face shields, which at the time seemed like a pretty astronomical number to us.
Mm-hmm.
But we were willing to jump in and help. We unboxed our 3D printers that normally we would put into a classroom, and same with our laser cutters, and just kind of went after it. It was less of a well thought out decision than like, hey, we're going to do whatever we can to help Waterloo Region. And then a few days later, Ontario Health got a hold of us, and it just sort of spiraled from there. Like, it grew and grew and grew. We went from having contracts for a few 100,000 to millions of shields in a matter of weeks.
Okay, so Erin had talked a little bit about the logistical hurdles that she had to face, kind of dealing with something that is still in a paper world, tangibly considered, right? And how she was trying to surpass that, as we do this live stream remotely instead of in person. You don't really have that option when you're manufacturing protective equipment. How have you handled, while everyone else is talking about remote work, return to work, all this, you're like, no, we're in the factory every day making things, or we're in the office turning this into a manufacturing facility making things. What has that been like?
Yeah, I mean, particularly in those very early days, it was a really crazy experience. I mean, we went from a 5,000 square foot facility to a 50,000 square foot facility. In 30 days, our team grew from 10 to 150. We received contracts for 11 million face shields. We made 1 million face shields in that time. Um, I'm trying to think of other numbers in that sequence, but in between all of that was all of the equipment that we had to bring in to make all of that possible, and even onboarding people into a factory setting at a time when no one really knew how to operate in COVID. We had to kind of make it up, work with public health, and um, do our best to stay safe because we knew that if we shut down, then we weren't going to be able to help. It was a massive challenge, and then there's like all the supply chain issues behind it. There was shortage of the raw materials that we needed to make shields. My least favorite story is we used to use buttonhole elastic for the headband on your shield, and we used to have to literally cut holes in it to make it buttonhole because you could only get regular elastic, and we couldn't get machine tooling done fast enough, to start scaling this way. So there was lots of really crazy things that we had to do and just like get creative to work around those supply chain issues. But eventually it did become more stable. And, since then we've made a total of 16 million face shields and have now transitioned the business really to making disposable surgical masks. So we're trying to build a sustainable supply chain for Canada's domestic PPE supply.
Okay, there's a lot there, and if if this conversation doesn't fully unpack all of the insane things that Jeremy has tried to solve this year, I heartily recommend you check out the podcast we record with him, and you can get a little bit insight into his work day and how he allocates his time between two companies and all of this. But I want to get Wayne involved here because Wayne, we've been working together with Cisco Canada, Cisco Designed on a resiliency series for small businesses, giving them tools and resources so that they go into 2021, that they come out of 2020 with a plan on how to survive, really. There's a couple of things that we've talked about in that series. I'm hearing these things in Erin's answers, Jeremy's answers. I'm wondering where you want to take this, maybe even just in the role of remote work, because both of them in certain ways have had to deal with social distancing. That doesn't seem to be going anywhere. Whether it is having people working in the office, having people working at home, having people being there, a blend, the safety considerations around that. What is your take on how that's evolved in 2020 for this sector overall?
Yeah, so we in the Innovation Center really help customers with a number of business challenges. And when COVID hit, a lot of our customers were faced with that immediate need to get their workers working safely and securely remotely. And more, we have seen that work is not a place anymore; it's an activity. Mm-hmm. And so with the immediate response that was needed to get workers to be able to do all of the things that they have typically done in the office at home and provide the capabilities for them to still do work effectively and securely, but still do all the other things that from a collaboration perspective, from a business continuity perspective, was really kind of top of mind and very critical. From an Innovation Center perspective and from the work that we've done with customers, we have consistently seen that even, especially in the pandemic, businesses that have had a digital first capability are the most resilient to adapt to new markets, new challenges, and new trends. And that's kind of one of the things that we've seen. And these examples are really strong here because they both were able to pivot really, really quickly to what that new world looks like. And so what we've really helped customers kind of unpack and think about is what do they need to do to get continuity immediately, but how do they take the framework of, okay, things are changing, businesses need to adapt and learn from those adaptations so that they are now building for their next new versions of normal, whatever that will look like. So from a reflection and a reimagining of how to get to customers, how to have a secure output of work, how to enable consistent ongoing work from every employee. From an innovation perspective, providing the framework of how digital readiness can make every organization more agile is a really cultural important aspect of this. And so from a readiness perspective, businesses need to look at how do they build out these models learn very quickly and adapt. And when they need to pull the plug on a new process or a new outcome, learn from it and then apply new business models. Because what's going to come next is taking the learning from this and being able to pivot and double down on innovation, and all of the things that they need to really focus on with the new business models that have emerged from this.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think, to speak on behalf of Erin and Jeremy in to follow up on that, I think we've heard in both of their examples instances where if there was a breakdown in the digital component, they were willing to iterate and find a way to bridge that gap, whether it's, being the I forgot the term, Erin, sorry, but like being the witness for people who need them. Like, I know you've been like studying up to be certified yourself personally, to Jeremy, like, the number of iterations you've done on that protective equipment, just basically, the minimum viable product for a physical thing is pretty hacky in the beginning, I think is important. But following up on this, Wayne, you said something really interesting about kind of the go to market strategy. And we're looking at two businesses that have attacked that in very different ways by necessity. And so I'm going to go back to Erin. You had mentioned off the top that you had kind of actually paused marketing at the beginning of the pandemic because 2020 was forcing a conversation and interest that was fueling you anyways, right? But I've also noticed that as the 2020s wore on, a very interesting approach to, I wouldn't necessarily even call it marketing, but facilitating that educational component related to estate planning online through social. And by this, I mean, I follow you on Instagram and I see you doing Instagram videos explaining to people what estate planning is in the most simple terms. So I'm wondering if you can talk about how maybe your communication strategy has evolved into raising the level of awareness or continuing to fuel that 2020 awareness on the importance of this. And then maybe we can dovetail into the recent acquisition that you made and how that's expanding kind of markets for you as you spread across Canada.
Yeah, great question. So, we face a challenge with Willful because we're not selling socks on the internet. We're selling a product that is pretty opaque. If I asked you to tell me the ins and outs of wills and estate planning, the average person probably wouldn't know. And it's very similar to taxes. We see ourselves akin to a TurboTax, where they're taking this really complex process that most consumers don't understand or don't want to learn how to do themselves and kind of simplifying it. And so part of the way that we've decided to do that is through education, because when I looked at kind of the customer persona of who we created the company for, it was for us. We had a family member pass away who hadn't done a lot of that planning. And we thought, we're using Wealthsimple. We're using all of these great Canadian tech tools like Borrowell for all of these other aspects of our financial wellness. This is kind of the missing pillar. And we're still doing it the same way we were 40 or 50 years ago, trudging into a lawyer's office and paying thousands of dollars. So a big pillar of our marketing strategy has been just baseline education. And I get asked these questions every day. What is a will? What's the difference between that and a power of attorney document? What are the different purposes of the two? Do they come into effect at the same time? What makes a will legal? So answering these baseline questions is imperative before I even get you to the point where you say, okay, when I do that thing, I'm going to do it with Willful. So, and I've also, looking at the competitive landscape, there's a lot of lawyers who are buying bus shelter ads and doing, the traditional marketing methods, but we have a unique value proposition in that not only are we a different type of consumer, but we can speak to people on different platforms that other people aren't on. So you probably, thank you for not mentioning my very embarrassing TikTok videos, but, it was an experiment for me to see, can I use this up and coming platform to reach an audience that I know is in our target customer demographic of people in their 30s and 40s, having kids, buying homes. And it was a really good validation that, it's a topic that's uncomfortable, but it's also a topic that everyone has questions about. And if you actually just kind of put yourself out there in an engaging way, people are not afraid to kind of get in touch with questions. And to your point about the acquisition, we just acquired a company called Willoughby out of Ottawa, also does online wills. And, I'm not an estate lawyer by background. To your point, I'm getting a bunch of accreditations, but Willoughby was founded by estate lawyers. And, I really admire lawyers who look at the current process and say, we're not going to do things the way that we've always done them. We're going to innovate. And so it's actually great to be able to team up with their team, which has deep expertise in estates law, and to bring their customers into the Willful fold, because our goal has never been, maybe it's not a Jeremy where we're going to, have a separate company and do something completely different. But the goal has always been to use wills as an entry point to create a suite of products that help you prepare for and deal with death in a digital age. So we see this as our one step forward in becoming that household brand for end of life planning, which I don't think really exists in Canada today.
Yeah, it's interesting that how much of that is just changing the way that people think about things, and how that's being fueled and prompted by 2020. Just asking the question or presenting it in a more modern way, as you're saying. If I can do this for all my other kind of banking financial needs, why can I do this for one of the most important things that comes to my family's financial future? Jeremy, you have a kind of like a simpler road with this because you're making the thing. But then I think, as we know, when it comes to physical goods and then who you're selling to, that kind of fulfillment process is that's the difficult thing, right? You had started off this conversation mentioning about how you had taken on this endeavor, noting the gap in PPE that hospitals in your area were having. What is it beyond scaling up the process to make the thing? How do you navigate both, Health Canada approval, because this is considered like kind of like I don't know if it's technically a medical device, but it's in the medical field. How do you navigate then the procurement contracts from provincial, federal governments to then, make sure that what you're building, what you're manufacturing is getting to the people who need it the most? Was that as difficult, more difficult than actually scaling up the manufacturing?
Yeah, I mean, first, congrats to Erin on the acquisition. That's super exciting. Our MDL license, so our medical device establishment license, came through on day 4, so it was a very unusual time, right? And normally that's a 120 day process. It takes forever to do. They do site inspections. None of that was happening at the time. It was really like obviously there was a shortage, so they were just desperate to get people to come in and help. Now I think that the real challenge for us is that the market is transitioning. Now we're going back to sort of a stage of normalcy, and Canada is actually sort of unique. We don't have our own medical device standards. We rely almost wholly on American standards. So some of that regulatory control, like that, impacts where we can operate and what we can create. I would love to be working with respirators, so like similar to an N95, which I'm sure you've heard of, like 3M making, but we really can't make N95s without coming up against 3M's legal beast. And if we had a Canadian standard for respirators, we could actually enter that space. Countries like South Korea, China, countries around the world have their own respirators. So there's some regulatory work that needs to be done. Probably, not a dissimilar challenge to what Erin was mentioning about housing wills online and how that impacts the business and the model. I think our big challenge now is that we have to disrupt traditional supply chains that are contracted for overseas supplies. We've got to change the regulatory environment so that it reflects, Canadian intellectual property in the space and allows us to fairly compete in some of these product categories. And then, frankly, because of global price competition, our labor cost is much higher than what you're going to see in overseas markets. So we have to be 10 times more innovative. So the automation that we deploy, how we actually make these masks, is going to be very different than what's done in countries like China overseas. So there's a fair few new and exciting challenges that we're taking head on. But yeah, in those early days, honestly, it happened so fast. I mean, it was 30 days that most of those contracts happened in, and our MDL and license. Now it's like we're really getting down to the grit and the hard work. And frankly, I feel like we're building an industry. I think that Canada has a real opportunity to become a leader in this space if we do it right.
Okay, and that's important to note. I think both of you, we're talking about transitioning from survival to success. a lot of that relates to innovation, and it seems like both of you are pushing against some of the limitations of the spaces that you're playing, and whether it's regulatory or just a lack of regulation, or connecting some of the gaps between a full stack being able to be that kind of vendor for your space. Wayne, obviously they were just talking about kind of being flexible when it comes to go to market approach, and even maybe solving some of the industry problems there so that they can then satisfy that. I'm wondering if you have a take on that, or if this is maybe something that we can pivot to a conversation, because I know in our most recent interview with you, one of the things that really stood out to me is this conversation around prioritizing the urgent versus the important. Like Jeremy, like it sounds ridiculous now that Jeremy's talking about something that was happening in a 30-day period, but I think we all have to remember that in that 30-day period, every day felt like a million years or 10 minutes.
It's so true, and hats off to Jeremy. I think what the pivot that he exhibited is truly amazing. From a from an innovation center perspective, when we were aware of the pandemic, and all of our customers were dealing with the immediate response to that, we as an innovation center had to do a little bit of self inspection as well, to say, okay, our customers are not going to be thinking about innovation as a top of mind right now. They're going to be focusing on how do they get their own business done. So we as an innovation center also have to think about what could we do to help. And one of the things that we actually pivoted to very quickly was lighting up a project that was entirely unlike something that we would typically do within our center, and it was to figure out how do we enable access to underserved low-income communities with free Wi-Fi. And it was kind of a very interesting project that we kind of kicked off with some of our strong partners in the city of Toronto to actually look at how do we enable connectivity to these communities that could do with access to the internet, for all of the reasons that now are even more critical because everyone's at home. And even that presented a lot of challenges with how do we do that in an area where we're not actually able to get access to the buildings because of lockdown, or we can't provide access to community rooms in those buildings because they can't social distance. So we had to come up with a way of kind of enabling these connectivity components to be done even on the rooftops. So we actually enabled the access points configured. How do we actually support them and erect them on the roofs of buildings and still get connectivity through to the units themselves? So that was one of our intentions of pivoting to something that was very immediate, very topical and relevant based on the responses to COVID. The other kind of thing that I'll just touch on super quickly is the issues of around security that our customers came to us for when they moved home. A lot of the issues of smaller businesses particularly don't feel that they are a candidate for cybersecurity. 78% of all small businesses have been attacked with some kind of cyber attack within 2019. So the capabilities of being able to help them with that was one of the immediate ways that we were able to kind of show them the path to a more secure environment, now that they have a lot more unusual attack vectors that could be exposed to hackers or bad actors. So those are just kind of two things that, from a pivoting perspective, what we did specifically to be more relevant to the immediate needs, but then also to help our customers.
Yeah. Okay. It's really interesting, and this actually leads up nicely. Stefan has been sending me some of the questions that are being submitted, and it just so we're to the audience, we're 30 minutes into this conversation now. If you have questions, please get them in so that we can try to address them on stream. If not, we'll look to get them answered when the stream stays up on Facebook, Twitter, and BetaKit as well. But one of the questions that came in was related to this reader identified that there. Kind of all the businesses that we're talking about here had unexpected opportunities offered kind of through the pandemic. How much of a necessity is it in 2020 going into 2021 for businesses, and do any of you advise these businesses to maybe change or reevaluate what they offer in response to the new world presented by the pandemic? Is it more about trying to push through the business that you had through this, or is it more about adapting and evolving what you offer and what you do and what you're about to the new world? I think it's really interesting because it seems in each of the examples we're seeing cases of you guys. I don't know if you were consciously choosing that or just falling into it and running for it. And I'll have that as an open question to anyone who wants to take that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Wayne kind of said it the best in his Beta Kit article about resilience and just being prepared to shift when needed. And I think this year has shown us that we're all more resilient than we thought as people and also as businesses. And it also was this stark reminder that, I think a lot about Airbnb, humming along, growing, raising all this funding. I don't know that anyone at the company, maybe they did, but did anyone anticipate that global travel would grind to a halt? That's not even a scenario that you put on the scenario matrix when you're doing your long-term planning, right? So I think what this has taught us is that it doesn't matter what type of business you're in. I've seen businesses, pest control businesses that have gone to disinfectant companies for condo buildings. Jeremy's is a great example. And what a fantastic story of kind of pivoting to solve a need, regardless of what
That's a new
industry
business.
you're in.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Just created a whole new business.
Exactly. And if you even think about the businesses we wouldn't have even thought were interesting a year ago, space heater businesses are now blowing up. I mean, there's just been so much interesting opportunity that has been created. And instead of businesses kind of shrinking away from it, and I've seen instead that overwhelmingly business owners have adapted, whether it's spin studios renting out their bikes to users to put in their condos, or restaurants doing meal kits, to a company that I mentor who shifted from local experiences to doing virtual events for companies. And we're doing a team cocktail event with them tomorrow. So there's so many examples of that. And I don't know that you can anticipate what the next COVID will be, but we all as business owners have to know something will come up that changes our industry or our company, whether that is regulatory change, a competitor coming out, consolidation in your space. And this is a reminder, not that you can scope everything out in terms of a plan, but that you are nimble and resilient when these things happen and you will get through it.
Yeah, that's such a strong message. Let me just hold on that and I'll throw to you, Wayne, because I think we're all responding to this idea. Because I think traditionally we hear as founders, as entrepreneurs, there's almost kind of like a going down with the ship mentality of you're going to be, the first one in, last one out. You are going to work and work and work until you see this thing you're building being a success. And it's almost like the lesson that we're taking from this is you don't need to go down with the ship. Sometimes you have to realize, maybe we shouldn't be a ship this week. Maybe we should be a bicycle. Maybe we should be a plane. Maybe we should be something else. And it's in that fluidity, that flexibility that allows you to achieve. Like, Wayne, were you reacting to that as well?
I was. I mean, Erin gave some really, really strong examples. And I think more and more it is really around that culture of being agile and nimble and understanding that, there is a fail fast and move on mentality and not going down with the ship. It is about, we understand that this period is going to be difficult for everybody. And from a financial perspective, there are a lot of hurdles to overcome. But collectively, if an organization, a company, any business that is looking to innovate, it is about failing fast, moving on, taking those learnings and pivoting to new business models. I mean, I love the examples because there have been so many ways that companies have pivoted to even access to customers. So even curbside pickup as a route to expedite point of sale is now probably going to be an ongoing capability that stores will offer because it has been so successful. And solving a really critical need at this time that is now becoming, a very likely thing that we don't want to give up. So I think, I love the examples, and I just wanted to add on to that.
Jeremy, do you have anything to add there? Like, obviously you're just kind of like, yeah, I started another business, mic drop, like, duh, we spun it out. It had to be its own thing. Is there anything else there, or can we maybe transition into talking about how you now balance that? I know when we interviewed you before on the podcast, you were talking about like, yeah, I'm just doing a 14-hour day, in at 8, out at 11 or midnight, digging it every day, and obviously you are in pretty good shape. It seems fairly young. I could not even conceive the workload that you have right now. But is there something more to that you're doing to balance that stuff? How are you now that you've made the decision to be fluid to the point where you've got two businesses beside each other? How are you navigating that going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think on both sides, it's all been about being flexible and adapting. I was excited to hear that Wayne and the team at Cisco were working on bringing internet access to some of these communities that don't have it, because particularly on the education side of our business, so many of these kids are back at home trying to work asynchronously with their teachers, and if they don't have access to internet, it's impossible. So there's a whole generation of students that might lose that opportunity. So on that side of the business, we've like completely redesigned all of our curriculum and learning modules for teaching coding and robotics and 3D printing, so that they're online, asynchronous, and can be supported with kids at home. So I would say that for anybody in business right now, we have to expect we've got 2 to 3 years more of this pandemic. And
Mm.
throughout that, you're going to have to be flexible, jump on new opportunities as they come. Balance for me as a kind of a dual company founder, it's difficult for sure. It's a lot of work to just jog. It's just mentally like jogging back and forth between the two. But I think that we're on really good tracks on both sides, and I've got a really great team supporting me. So they certainly make it easier. I spent a lot of time out on the river this summer, so I did end up
Mm.
towards the end here, coming into fall, doing lots of kayaking. I was going out every day, so I'm finding my time too.
Okay, so you're creating those breaks. I think that's important, and I think maybe this will be the kind of final question that I have prepared that I'll ask, and then we'll go to some of the questions Stefan's been compiling. And again, if you submit your question now, if you don't get your question asked, maybe we'll look to have our panelists participate on Facebook or on Twitter and send an answer, or we'll include it in the wrap up. But something Erin said earlier about the idea, and Jeremy, you just talked about like the next 2 years. Now that businesses who have been able to survive have learned kind of what it takes to be resilient, you don't want to then throw that out when the emergency is over. So that's going to require a go forward capacity to you know prioritize what is urgent and what is important. Has there been anything that any of you have learned this year about doing that you're going to carry forward into the year that we can maybe company agnostic ladder up and provide entrepreneurs watching this right now?
I'll just kind of jump in super quickly with that. And what we faced is, there is always the need to do both. There is the urgent and there is the important, and it's critical to not confuse the two. The urgency will always, drive the immediate activity, but it is important sometimes to take a step back and think more intentionally, creatively, and ruthlessly about what is it that really needs to get done, and not just respond to every urgent fire drill that comes up. And it's easier said than done, but it is really critical to think about, both of those things have to be done, but compartmentalizing when it is truly an effort that is for immediate response versus thinking about more strategically what's important over the long run, especially taking the view of what's here and now, and what is in the future. It's a bit of an art, but I think it's an ongoing practice that everybody needs to develop to be able to separate those two.
Erin, I'll throw to you there just and following up on Wayne's, we're talking about fire drills. How are you balancing that when the fire drills are actually fires this year, like real live fires?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two sides to it. I think as founders, you're always so in the weeds inherently because you didn't start with a big team and you were doing everything from unloading the dishwasher at the office to thinking about strategic planning, right? So part of what I've really noticed this year is that you have to make time for that. Maybe it's after Jeremy's 14-hour day, right at the end of it. You have to take time and block it for that strategic thinking and strategic planning, because it's so easy to get lost in your inbox, to Wayne's point, to be so lost in the everyday, and you almost forget to step outside of it and, to use a sports analogy, which is very unlike me, skate to where the puck is going instead of where it is, right? So I think that's been a good reminder. And I always think of something that a business coach once told me, which is that as a founder or a leader, your job is to be needed but not necessary. And what he was really saying was, you have to be able to delegate. You have to hire people around you who you can empower to do the day-to-day. And while you still want to be a resource and remove roadblocks and mentor your team, you shouldn't be the one who's doing all of the day-to-day tasks and who's a bottleneck, because your job is to be the one that is thinking 6 months ahead while your team is thinking today. So I think it's a good reminder from Wayne, the whole kind of urgent and what's necessary today and what can I actually leave, or what actually isn't a priority for me and should be passed on to my team, is an important reminder. Because to Jeremy's point about being slammed, self-care has been this massive issue in 2020 for founders who have been struggling through this. And it only gets worse as your company gets bigger, trying to balance everything. And so I think learning that earlier is hopefully helpful.
Yeah, Erin, I think I felt you speaking into my soul there, to be honest. That idea of recognizing that you can be the best intentioned bottleneck at your own company is huge when it comes to not only solving problems, but scaling and giving yourself space. We did get, to just Erin's point and what Jeremy had said before, a question about just tactics to kind of balance mental and physical health. I will kind of maybe go back to you, Jeremy, on that, just because you kind of spoke to it. And like, honestly, man, just give us the deets, give us the real deals. How did you approach like building this in? Because I think a lot of, there's a lot of talk about mental health for entrepreneurs and imposter syndrome, and the need to prioritize your own health and well-being. That has never been more important than in COVID times, where the vast swath of society is facing that. How did you proactively take the steps and make sure to schedule that in? Give us the tools of the trade there.
You know what? You nailed it before when you said, you can be the best intentioned bottleneck at your company. You just have to let go. You have to let people, like other people, make the decisions. So, I'm not doing 14-hour days anymore. I would be super burnt out if I was. It was sort of when you and I met the last time, that was May 7th, I think, because I was checking the date on the podcast. So that was like peak, really crazy. So for me, it was really just about building a good leadership team around me that I was confident that, could make good decisions and execute. And then, just trying to get back to some hobbies and do things that weren't so heady. I mean, I've even been doing like reno work on the house, and sometimes it's good to, get a sledgehammer out and bang around. But as long as you've got a couple hours a day.
Sometimes you need to build things. Sometimes you need to break things. I totally get that. But so now when you did that though, because like, let's get to the decision point there, because I know people are hearing that, seeing themselves in it, but I want to know about the motivation to switch that over. Was it you saying to yourself, if I don't what, I really need some me time right now? Or was it more, if I don't do this, I'm going to burn out and then we can't achieve our mission, or I'm not going to be useful? Like, what was the thing that actually told you to leave and get in that canoe or take that hike?
Yeah, I mean, it was really just a function of, you've only got so much in the old battery, and it was pretty clear to me that if I kept up at that pace for too much longer, that it wasn't going to be sustainable. So I don't know that it wasn't like a TSN turning point, but it was pretty clear to me and to the team, frankly. I mean, it wasn't just me doing that; it was many of us doing that. So it was like, making sure that my management team was good and that they had the right support that they needed for them, so that we could find that balance in the organization. And frankly, too, the scale of demand and urgency also started to fall off. So like, the problems we had became less urgent, and we just collectively claimed back that time. And part of the thing I think that was really good was that I did it first, and then other people realized that that was okay. Like, I think sometimes when you're the founder and you're like so invested, you can drag people along at a pace that and they might have husbands or wives and kids and all these other things that, yeah. Anyway, it was a very good thing for our organization, I think.
Yeah. They're like children. They're always watching you and learning lessons, whether or not you intend them to. Okay. I've got one more audience question, then maybe I think we'll look to wrap this up because we're in a really good place. And I want to get to this one because this is one of those things where in the anonymized process of a online stream panel, we can have this question asked and answered. And that was actually related to like what founders or small business owners should focus on when it comes to cybersecurity. Because that is, I feel like for a business, I don't really know what a will is type question. Like I've heard of cybersecurity. I know it's important. I don't want my business hacksored. I have no idea where to start. Just quickly, Wayne, can you give them even just like where to go, like thing to keep top of mind to get them started on that path?
Sure.
Asking for
So
a
it's
friend.
there's a yeah. So it's a really great question. There's three main things that you want to focus on. One is securely allowing your team members to have connectivity, but securely from anywhere. And so, not to be too salesy, but there are Cisco solutions for all of these, for these three buckets. I'm not going to talk about the specific ones, but so there is kind of like the VPN type of solutions. Then there are the firewalls that will allow secure access to public internet sites. And then the third and critical piece that I think is emerging now as everybody's more aware of it is dual factor authentication. So how do you, from an individual's perspective, make sure that you have connectivity to corporate resources securely? And that's the VPN piece. The second piece is how do you provide and ensure that you've got connectivity to any public internet sites. Again, it needs to be securely, and that's kind of what is generally known as firewalls. And then from a individual device, whether it's your laptop, from your mobile device, even your iPad, what is that dual authentication mechanism to ensure that it is not just somebody that has your password that can get into any of your corporate resources. It is also a secondary level of authentication to mean that you have also verified on an approved device from a extra authentication level perspective. So at a super high level, those are the three things that you want to think about. For a lot of companies that don't have robust IT departments, you want to think about easily provisioned cloud supported applications. Cisco has a lot of those. But yeah, those are the three things at a high level you want to think about. And then obviously, there's a lot of resources online that you can look at.
Yeah, as a tech journalist, I can say if there's one thing that you do after this call, please enable two-factor authentication on anything you possibly can. Make that part of your company culture, because that is the thing that will prevent the worst case scenario. And then for the other stuff, I know you kind of mentioned cloud. That's its own conversation. So, and a little outside the scope of this stream. So I think now is a really great time to throw to upcoming conversations that we're having. Cisco was kind enough to invite me to participate in their upcoming event. And then a slide's going to magically appear any second now for people in the audience to see this. There we go. Cisco Connect Canada is happening November 17th. I can't believe they asked me to participate. I was super happy to do it. We actually talked about technology as a small business driver for that conversation, but there's a whole day of content happening remotely that you can check out. The URL for this is cisco.com/ca/Cisco Connect Canada. To register, get signed up, check it out. I had a great time recording this conversation in advance. I heartily suggest you check it out. I want to thank everyone for participating in this conversation. It's been really fun. I think I could talk to each of you individually for hours. There's some of you that I have. Getting you together in this conversation together has been really fun. It was supposed to be 45 minutes. It flew by. I would like to say to the audience that maybe have submitted questions. If you're seeing this post live, you're seeing the video on Facebook, you're seeing the video on Twitter, submit your question in the comments. We'll get to it. We're going to do a wrap up on BetaKit. We'll publish a write up, an HD version of the video. We'll try to get our panelists to maybe give us some additional insight and squeeze that in, because again, the reason why we wanted to do this is because 2020 has been a heck of a year. Anything that we can do to make it a little bit better, to show you people who have been able to navigate 2020, not through luck, but through will, skill, and like grit. Anything that we can share of their stories that can rub off on you, we really wanted to do it because I think we all want to get into 2021 feeling a little bit better. On that note, I want to thank again all the panelists for participating. I had a great time.
Thank
Hey,
you
thanks so much
for
for having
having
me
us.
on.
Thank you. This is awesome. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. And until next time, Beta Kit out. We'll be seeing you.